The hamstring injury took part in round two. As much as 7 players succumbed to the soft tissue injuries throughout the course of the round, sparking debate on what is causing this. And looking ahead to also some important news, which dropped out also only the best part of 24 hours ago with AFL.com.au's Callum Toomey looking into what's the most important for senior coaches going forward, and particularly one of the incoming presidents too for the AFL, Brenton Sanderson, a former Collingwood, Geelong and Adelaide player, Adelaide coach during his time, and his philosophies going forward with this too. So much to discuss, and also to look ahead to the 7 games for round 3 as 4 clubs this week have the bye. My name is Yuri Bilzic, and welcome back to Out on the Full podcast here via Scoreboard Media, as I welcome back my co-host Woody for another week. Woody, how's it going?
Hey, Yuri. Yeah, very good, mate. Very good. St Kilda got a win, which is a nice change of pace. But otherwise, no, good to just enjoy football and relax over the weekend a bit more. How was your weekend, mate?
It was very good, Woody. I managed to watch pretty much all the games as well and caught up on the highlights of Adelaide Western Bulldogs, and there was so much riveting football that was played, particularly the Thursday night game, having gone back watched the replay of Hawks Sydney, and the way the ball was ping-ponging for the first 30 minutes of the contest, and then it completely subsided into this real sort of grinded-out style, and where clearances became the norm for winning the game, and Sydney had the early ascendancy for at least the best part of 3 quarters. There was a period there where they completely dominated around stoppages, and it took a Jai Newcombe goal right midway through the third quarter when Hawthorn conceded 4 consecutive goals to Sydney, trailed by 20 points. He kicks that goal from a stoppage, and sort of the whole balance of it changes for Hawthorn. And it was just a tremendous game to watch from start to finish. And if we're going to get anything of that particular caliber for the rest of this home and away season, then lock it in, pencil it in, and hopefully we have more of this, because I think it's really good to see the balances between attack, but also the balances between defending for your lives when the game's on the line.
Exactly right. That was an amazing match, and quite the tale of 2 different sort of tactical styles. As you mentioned, it was just very open flowing and a lot of goals in that first quarter, and then ground to a halt. And it sort of gave a little bit of insight of what might come to, later in the season, as we have seen sort of explosive scores throughout these first few weeks. As it becomes a bit more of a normal style of gameplay, how will the sides sort of react to that and adjust to it defensively? So I think that was a good game to kind of view what we might be seeing in sort of finals atmospheres.
And coaches have always been quick to pounce upon when opposition teams find a way, and that has always been a trend in these last few seasons, where we think scoring may maintain its high consistency for at least a couple rounds, and then within at least a round or 2, then the coaches absolutely go to work and zero in, and the game becomes almost stoppage-esque in a sense, which makes it very difficult to score, and then goals become a commodity, especially if it comes to slippery conditions or conditions at ground level which aren't ideal for tall forwards to take a mark, say, 7 or 10 marks a game, and really impact their sort of influence in the contest too. So we'll start off first, Woody, with some really important news, and of course headlined in the introduction as to those soft tissue injuries galore that occurred during round 2, and we've got a bunch of numbers which we're going to go through too, which highlights the magnitude of soft tissue injuries for a long time. I think since they started recording this back in 1992, and the percentage of reoccurrence of hamstring injuries, particularly in 1992 and 1993, were bonanza, to say the least. I think it was 45% and 40%, which, of course, back then with almost these high performance recoveries, it's not as it is currently to this current era. So sort of trying to compare back to the 1990s compared to now is just 2 completely opposite worlds. So your take first and foremost on, let's probably start with the interchange cap. I think we can probably zero in now on first, because the 75 cap rule came into effect in 2021. The 90 cap rule came into effect in 2016. And the 120 interchange cap rule came into effect in 2014. And before that, it was just a limited number of rotations. How much of an impact do you think this has had on the occurrence of soft tissue injuries thus far?
Yeah, it's hard to quantify. Obviously, I'm not, a physician of any type, but yeah, looking at the numbers, there's obviously been improvement over time, and that would most likely be advancements in sports sciences, general health practitioners as well. But yeah, I don't know how much you can attribute this to rule changes, though I do see a lot mentioning it in terms of the bench numbers. And Cox and a few others have suggested, but even sports scientists are suggesting it could be a situation of more high impact running and less endurance running, which those stop start motions can create a lot of problems for hamstrings specifically, as we've seen. So yeah, I guess I wanted to see your thoughts, mate, and if you think it is having a noticeable impact on the game.
I think it's always been a case for midfielders because they're the ones that have to run the most number of kilometres. And I'll probably take, for example, Chris Judd, right? And how many kilometres did he run per game? At least 15 to 17. And most of that was at full intensity. When you think about Judd in his prime, bursting away from stoppages with those first quick couple of steps, how much strain does that put on your hamstrings? And we saw that in 2014. Remember the game against the Western Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium? He comes on as the sub, late third quarter. He has the ball basically between half back and the middle of the ground. He's dashing away. Stuart Cranberry comes up and just gives him the slightest push. And he could just feel the twinge extension on his hamstring. And right away, that's when he'd done it. And this wasn't long right before his return from his previous injury. So those things just make it extremely difficult. And also what we saw Sunday with Connor Rose's injury, when you're trying to exert as much pressure, and what he did to try and create that lunging tackle and extend so far that your hamstring basically almost gets ripped off the bone. It's almost a sense of sheer unluckiness. And some players are susceptible to soft tissue injuries. And Adam Chera has been an example, right? 3 soft tissue injuries in the last 3 seasons. Adam Saar's had a couple, even though he's available for selection this weekend against Melbourne.
Adam Treloar as well. A few of the Adams. No, I get your point, mate. I think you're right. I think a lot of it comes down to unfortunate positioning, unfortunate timing. Look, maybe the rules aren't helping per se, but I don't know that we're seeing giant changes. I mean, looking at what we saw, in the early 90s, as we mentioned earlier, versus, the percentiles we're seeing now, as far as I know, looking around, it seems to be on average there's roughly about 28 or so, 30 games per club of new soft tissue injuries per year that are missed. And that doesn't seem to have changed a ton over the last 10 or so years. So I guess it will take some time. Obviously, we'll need a whole season's data before we can kind of make any conclusions. And even then, that might not be enough information to really start making solid analyses. But I think at this point we are seeing, we've obviously seen a big change to the rules, and I think it'll be a little while before we confirm how that affects the players.
And in 2012, Essendon underwent a similar injury crisis. Basically, I think James Hird mentioned late April that they were going to undergo a review as to why these soft tissue injuries were occurring. And we saw a number of their players sustain them. Angus Monfries, Carl Reimers, Michael Hibberd. Dustin Fletcher had a groin injury. Whether they call that a soft tissue injury or not, it's probably up for debate. Then there were numerous other players. Brent Stanton had one, and David Hill, I think, had a soft tissue injury in that Anzac Day game against Collingwood, and it just never stopped for them. And it pretty much derailed their campaign. They were top 4 after, I think, round 15, and then from there on, they lost their final 7 games and crashed out of the finals completely. And sometimes it's just a stroke of unluck for some teams. You just can't get your best 22 out in the park. And Richmond was an evidence of that in 2024. How many injuries did they have, which they couldn't field their best 22 week in, week out? So it just strikes at the wrong time for some teams. And I don't think it's the fault, though, of high-performance managers, because especially if a new one comes in, for example, and Darren Burgess being probably the better example of the lot, because what he'd done for Melbourne specifically when he came on board, ahead of the 2020 season, completely changed Melbourne's training methods, made them the most fittest team where they would run out games and you wouldn't see any of their players out on the field huffing and puffing because he absolutely ripped them to shreds with, I think, there was one pre-season training in 2019 in the off-season where I think they did about, I don't know if I've got this number right, but they did something in a number of 100 meter sprints or something and completely just knocked the stuffings out of the entire players. And I think that method, he's always had that. And it's the reason why Melbourne went on to win that flag and were able to run out games quicker and better than the opposition. And the same thing as what he did in Adelaide, right? He brought basically the same philosophy with him that worked during his time when he was at the EPL in the English Premier League. So it varies from high performance managers. And it's just one of those very interesting parts of it too, is that whose finger sort of gets the blame first, who in which direction. And this is the thing though with hamstring injuries. It's the most common occurring injury in the AFL. There's no two ways about it. And you're going to see that. It doesn't matter whether you play halfback, whether you play half forward, whether you play the Nick Rewalt or Jonathan Brown style where you push up the ground and take marks and be that gut running forward. And in Rewalt's case, he was already a magnificent long distance runner and what he'd already done before joining the AFL all those years ago. So it's very interesting. Do you have any sort of further additions too, Woody, on this?
I mean, look, I think I've said most of it, but at this point, I don't want to be jumping at shadows. And I think it really is a situation of, yeah, it's a bit odd, but odd things happen in footy all the time. And unless we were to see this consistently happening throughout the year where we're seeing higher numbers of hamstring injuries than usual, and even a year is, as I mentioned, probably not enough information. So I'd really be saying we probably, and this is to a lot of the rule changes that I think a lot of the AFL public is pretty on the money with this. We need to let rules settle so that we can get the information required to see how that has affected our game. I think that is one of the best parts of the Lasso rule is it was implemented at lower levels. We really got to see how it affected the match before bringing it up to AFL level. And I think now that we've brought these new rules in at AFL level, we do need to kind of let some of it just adjust so that we can see the flow-on effect in the next year or two. And if need be, we can rein things in, open up more interchange spots, that sort of stuff. So at this point, there does seem to be something a bit odd, but, I mean, that could just be footy being odd.
It's very interesting times with this whole sphere of injuries, and it's always a case in, week out. Some clubs extremely lucky as to how short their injury list is and be able to field your best team on a weekly basis, and others you're just going to have to almost pick up the pieces in a way and try and build the magnets as best as possible until the cavalry arrives in how long that may be.
We saw last year Essendon had to pick up a few extra players mid-season due to their injuries. So, I mean, if there is more injuries than normal, which I'm not certain about, there's mechanisms to keep the ball rolling. Your club's not going to just miss matches because there's too many injuries. So, probably not the stars out on the field that you'd want to see every week if you've got a ton of injuries, but, the world will keep moving.
So we'll move on from the injury crisis, if you want to use that term. It happens week in, week out anyway. But onto the other section of news too, which was first reported by AFL.com.au's Callum Toomey. And with Brenton Sanderson coming in too, the new Coaches Association as well, part of his new role within AFL House. And he's looking to almost get the balance now for senior coaches between what they do on the field and at the training track and away from footy, because it is a 24/7, 365, 12 months a year with no breaks whatsoever. How do we almost juggle this too for senior coaches, and particularly with the number of assistants they do have now, forward line coaches, stoppage coaches, backline coaches, tackling coaches, the list goes on. Just how does that balance get reassured to make sure that there isn't this almost large, strenuous load placed on the top senior coach for the respective 18 teams?
I'm not going to have an answer that I think Brett Sanderson would like. And it is suck it up, to be honest. And it's essentially the same thing Ross Lyon said a week ago to the people in the media world. I mean, if you want to speculate and not have the pressure, join us. Come sit on a podcast. But if you want to be a head coach, that's the job. And it sucks in some regards if you don't want to do that. So, I mean, I kind of don't, like the soft cap's rising. They're going to get paid more. There is more assistance than ever before. There's more information, so you're not just guessing. To me, I think he's barking up the wrong tree as somebody that's sitting on the outside saying, well, they've got a million different fingers they point the blame at until it finally comes back on them 4 years later. If they want to leave, they don't want the pressure, they can leave.
And we've seen so many assistant coaches for a long time, Woody, that work their backsides off for 15, 16 seasons to finally get their opportunity to become a senior AFL head coach. And Craig McRae took the best part of 15 seasons before he got his first opportunity at Collingwood in the start of September 2021. He'd worked at Richmond, worked at Collingwood back again. I think Brisbane, he was there for a short period of time. He'd done so many different roles within the whole AFL coaching system to finally get the position that he'd been striving for so long. And even Andrew McQualter's another one too, even though he had that prior interim head coaching experience at Richmond for half a season when Dimmer left at the end of midway through our 2023 season after they lost to Essendon in the Dreamtime game by a solitary point. So those are the things that it's almost, yes, it's risk and reward anyway, but the money for what they do is substantial enough, and we don't know exactly the estimate sums. And is it fair to go into that? No, not really, because I think everyone most likely knows what they do get compensated for the amount of hours they do behind the scenes to make sure that everything goes smoothly. So there's another probably good example, Woody, and this is a long time ago. And David Parkin, of course, was a two-time premiership coach, one at Hawthorn and also at Carlton. And it was really his time as a coach. He was also balancing, I think he was also an educator as well. He got his education degree from the University of WA. And there came a time where the workload and demands of the job became so much on him where he basically almost, I think, I wouldn't say he collapsed, but he was basically hospitalised because the amount of work that was put upon him to get the best out of his players and to get the best out of himself. And it was the way that he drove himself, I think, to those extreme levels that made it as hard as it was for him. And I think that's where we talk a long time ago, where perhaps in the early 2000s when we were growing up, where there was probably 2 or 3 assistants, and now that number's completely branched upon. Just those changes, do you think, Woody, particularly for coaches now and knowing when to balance it?
Yeah, I mean, it's not an easy job. I get his point. I think, if you're an outsider looking in, somebody that, would want to be in that position, you are going to grind to sort of endless levels to get there. Like there's 18 now jobs in the AFL for head coach roles. And it's one of the most competitive roles in the country. Like it's up top 5-ish, so I get his point. It's difficult. At the same time, it's only gotten simpler since we were younger, as you've mentioned. I think there is an element of you choose what level of pressure you put on yourself as well. And finally, I think things are kind of changing. Like Dimmer and Chris Scott didn't rock back up for preseason. They came and joined round 0, as far as I'm aware, and left the assistants up to it beforehand. So I'm pretty sure they had an extended holiday, which I haven't had for years. So I don't get his point. To be honest, I feel like they've got a great work-life balance. They get to choose what they do and don't do. I mean, look at Ross Lyon. I mean, even his press conferences, he doesn't really answer questions in a lot of ways. So the things he's required to do, he doesn't even do them. But I mean, that's where I think he's definitely experienced the hardest parts of coaching, and I think his story would be correct. But I don't think it's everybody's story, and I think to fit all of coaching around his experience is wrong.
And don't forget too, I think you probably watched the presser last year when the Saints lost to the Lions in round 7 at Marvel, and Gemma Bastiani from AFL.com.au asked Ross the question about Hugo Garcia subbing midway through the second quarter and why he was subbed out, and he didn't take too kindly to a question, and almost, I wouldn't say it was demonstrative, but he almost sort of ran circles around the answer and sort of it was almost teeter-totter in a way that he brought about it. So we'll move on now from those couple of headlines, Woody, onto the 7 games for round 3. And those 4 teams that do have the bye: Gold Coast, Western Bulldogs, Hawthorn and Sydney this round. And it all kicks off Thursday night down at the Cattery GMHBA Stadium between Geelong and Adelaide. And you probably know this very well, Woody, but the Crows haven't won down there since June 1st, 2003. They won, I think, by 11 points that afternoon. Mark Rasherdo was playing, Andrew McLeod was playing, and Simon Goodwin, just many of Adelaide's legends and part of their Hall of Fame and also the Australian Football Hall of Fame. And Geelong too, they had the bye last week and bounced back from an early deficit against the Dockers where they conceded 8 first quarter goals to overrun them to win by 10 points. The Crows do have a couple of outs though, with skipper Jordan Dawson out with a calf injury, just wasn't quite able to get up due to the short turnaround, 6 days, in fact, and Taylor Walker's being managed by the club this week. And for the Cats, it's pretty much the same lineup that they will have going into this. Where do you sort of see some of the balances too on this, Woody? Because I think Matthew Nicks spoke about it in his press conference where Adelaide were just a little bit too slow and left their run too late. And the Cats, we don't see too many times often they trail by 5-6 goals, look lackluster and then fight their way back. Your thoughts on the balance of the game from what we should expect?
It was interesting, particularly the Freo Geelong match. I thought Geelong were. I thought Freo were home at halftime. It looked like they just needed to kind of keep the ball rolling in some respects, and it was good to go. But I mean, credit to Geelong. It was a match I thought would be more difficult for them, and it was, and they met the expectations. So really good effort by Geelong. I do think this will be another interesting match. I'm just not sure that I like the structures defensively for Geelong against Adelaide. I think they've got a lot of good lockdown players, but I think Adelaide's real strength from their forward line is their ability to really mingle with the midfield, particularly now that Jordan Dawson's out. I'd expect more time from Rochelle that, was a little bit down on last week with the inclusion of Rankin. So I think this could be one of those matches where it almost benefits Adelaide by having this injury, putting a bit more slippery players with a bit of pace in the midfield to take on these sort of not quite as older heads in the midfield of Geelong, but definitely surrounding it and put that pace to the test to see if they can keep up. So fairly similar, I think, in terms of style that Freo played against the Cats. So it'll be interesting if they can kind of go back to back with what I think is a similar style but a more threatening offense.
And I think also love the onus falls on Sam Berry and Jake Saligo, who had pretty good games last week, and Saligo's impact these last 3 seasons, I think it just doesn't need to be talked about too much further. Particularly, it all started that game against Carlton 2024 at Docklands where they came back and won by a couple of points, and that was his breakout game at that point. And ever since then, he's just gone from the next step to the next step and become a really prominent piece of Adelaide's midfield. And I think that was the part where the Crows were searching for a fair amount, was who was going to come up as that next crop, because now Rory Laird, who's gone from midfield back to his half-back spot where he first started his career, I think all the way back in 2012, 2013, is that a lot of that responsibility now is bestowed upon those youngsters to give them that extra juice. And we saw that a little bit last week against the Western Bulldogs, where you mentioned, Woody, with Rochelle rotating through midfield. And Adelaide have done that for the last couple of seasons. And Rankin, where he had a really quiet 3/4 and kicked that crackerjack goal from the right forward pocket with, I think, 8 minutes left in the game. And those moments there, I think, for Adelaide are just transcendental for what they can do extremely well. And at ground level, I think, is going to be such a big key. And it's true against Geelong, where you just have to cut out the amount of aerial marking they take with Tom Stewart there, Sam de Koning down back. If they're able to mitigate that as much as possible, and Darcy Fogarty, who had a bit of a quiet game last week, and Riley Thilthorpe too, who's just, you can't double team him in a way, and leave him at the top of the goal square and allow him to take those big contested marks one-on-one. I think they are a chance, Adelaide, but as everyone knows, against Geelong at GMHBA Stadium ever since 2007, it's a very difficult task to get the win down there. And it just feels though what occurred a couple of weeks ago, I just don't see it happening again for the Cats, and see them drop their bundle for at least half an hour. Just, it won't eventuate.
Yeah, I don't think this will be a match that Adelaide can get away from Geelong. I think if they can win it, which I do think they've got a reasonable chance, I think it goes down to the wire. What I'd be most interested in seeing is some of Adelaide's different sort of structures. Last week, we even had a few moments where Thilthorpe was a pure mid, not ruckman, but a mid. So, yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to see how they'll hold up. It looks like Paddy Dangerfield might be out as well, re-aggravating his calf. So, I mean, if there's a time to go up against Geelong, it's now.
Definitely, for sure, Woody. And a lot of things to play out in this one on Thursday night. We'll move on to the Friday night game between Collingwood and GWS at Marvel Stadium, Woody. Quick trivia question. How many times have the Magpies and Giants played each other at Docklands?
Oh, Docklands. Oh, like 4? 5?
Nope.
It's not many.
No, it's not many.
Is it 2?
No.
I've danced it either way here. It's either 1 or 3. I'm going to guess 1. I guess it's just the once.
Very close. 0. This is the first time ever. Yep, 0.
I would have thought it must have happened at some point.
No.
Wow. Shocking. So, okay, well, Collingwood's all right at Marvel, and I know that their fans don't love Marvel, so I mean that's a benefit for GWS if you can quiet Collingwood's fans, maybe stop them holding on to the ball in behinds as Eddie has instructed them to do. Then you might be in with a shot at kind of taking him to the line, especially with the injuries that GWS is facing. Look, had they not had so many, I think there'd be a lot stronger push for them to be even potentially the favourite. But I think the Marvel is probably their saving grace at this point.
And those couple of injuries that we spoke about, Woody, so Adam Kingsley spoke about in his press conference last weekend in that 4-point loss to St Kilda. 3 players are expected to come back: Aaron Cadman, Brent Daniels and Toby Bedford. And for Collingwood, premiership players Darcy Moore and Jeremy Howe also to return from their respective hamstring injuries. So a big bolster for Collingwood's backline, where they're pretty much playing sort of shuffle the deck chairs a bit for those first couple of games. Then they're primarily playing Braden Maynard as that second tall defender. So they'll relieve him to go back and play that medium defender role, and that matchup which has been so prevalent for the last 4 seasons, him playing on Toby Green and shutting him down every single time. Just on the Giants' disposal efficiency last weekend, Woody, because you watched it from start to finish, and this was something that was extremely uncharacteristic of them. The amount of skill errors by foot that they kept butchering over, where there was missed kicks over the head of teammates in their back half, which resulted in Saints forward half turnovers, especially in that first half. I think there was a statistic at one point where they're only going at 27% kicking efficiency, I think, during the second quarter. Your thoughts on that?
They were like, it's hard to say, right? Like, because you don't want to say it was through no effort of St Kilda. But St Kilda didn't have particularly high tackle numbers. Reasonable pressure numbers, reasonable one percenters, but it felt more like a skill error, execution error problem from GWS's side. And look, this could be, the Ralston and Angwins kind of getting that more exposure. It could be, giving Caniglios the midfield time. He's still playing a bit of forward, but probably not known for his sharp boot, So it is a situation where I wonder if it's just the lack of Josh Kelly, the fact that Callaghan was clamped fairly well by Garcia, the reliance on Oliver, who, not the best kick, also probably doesn't know their game plan as thoroughly as others. I wonder if it's just a combination, as they did look to basically fix it by halfway through the third, sort of fourth quarter situation. So I'm not going to write GWS off yet, but I think they are getting tested with how much depth that they have.
Should be a fascinating game as to how this one pans out with the Magpies and Giants, and a must-win for both teams. And I think Adam Kingsley, just to mention, Woody, I don't think he's going to be too afraid of selection to axe a few players. There's something he spoke about at his weekly press conference. So whatever does occur from that will be a must look at to how the Giants 22 shapes out for Friday night's encounter under the roof at Marvel Stadium. We'll move on to Saturday's game because this game is also back at Marvel Stadium. St Kilda, Brisbane, Woody, where the Lions have won the last 5 encounters under the roof against the Saints at Docklands. You probably know the answer to this when St Kilda's last victory over the Lions was at the venue.
Oh, in Marvel. Was that 2021?
Incorrect.
Oh, when was it? 2020? I can't remember when we last beat them there. The one that really stands out to me between the Lions and St Kilda at Marvel is the 2006 match with the Austin Jones point. So, to be honest with you, it could be all the way back then, but I have a feeling we've done it sooner. When was it, mate?
So it was in round 1, 2018, the last time the Saints beat the Lions at the venue, and the last time the Saints beat Brisbane overall was round 17, 2021, up at Carrara.
Yeah, okay, that's where I was getting confused, of course. Look, it's been a while. That being said, Brisbane have a propensity to go 0-3 and then win the flag. So I'm fairly buoyed by that, and I think Saints might be able to get it done.
Well, I'm not hitting the emergency button at the moment on Brisbane. It's just all almost panic station talk at the moment, and we've seen so many teams, and Brisbane were the example in 2024, starting the season 2-5, and last season too, they had a little bit of a slip up in parts of the season and still able to regain it. So every team goes through those little lull patches where they're not quite at 100% playing at their best footy. And this is early in the season. We're only in round 3. And the injuries they've had to contend with too. Harris Andrews, their skipper's still out through suspension. And Hugh McCluggage, unlikely to play with that calf injury sustained against, I think it was the opening round game against the Western Bulldogs. So there's still a few little jostling pieces that they're still trying to make. But as for the Saints, Woody, and the second half, I think, was definitely the biggest testament of all, because the Giants, with their inside 50s that they piled up, there was 41 in total, and Callum Wilkie was absolutely, we say this week in, week out with him, but the number of one-on-one marking contests that he halved against Jesse Hogan, how much of that pivotal influence will that be, especially when he is not taking intercept marks? He's camped in that situation, say, most likely against Oscar Allen, that St Kilda can allow those other defenders to really almost take the front seat and allow Wilkie to do his thing in those one-on-one duels.
Yeah, he's been amazing this year, going at 27 disposal average, which is nigh unheard of for a key defender. I believe he had 8 contested defensive one-on-ones last week and didn't lose one. So, playing like he wants an AA that he was snubbed of last year. So keep it up and he might get it. But I think it'll be interesting. The Brisbane Lions have a fairly tall forward line, and it's been discussed in Saint circles about playing the four key talls that we've kind of got in Caminiti, Wilkie, Silvani, and even Taru to a lesser extent. Obviously, Caminiti was one of the hamstrings that we mentioned earlier in the program. So it's looking like he'll be replaced by Dougal Howard, which means St Kilda could still run that sort of 3 to 4 key defensive tools, which you might almost need with the inclusion of Logan Morris. We've already mentioned Oscar Allen. Sam Draper likes to spend a bit of time forward as well. There might be Ty Gallop, though I'm not sure that he'll actually play this round. So there's quite a few tall targets for Brisbane up forward if they want to go down that route, which I think St Kilda is somewhat lucky that they have the flexibility to move Taru forward to not get stuck into these sort of situations where there's more talls than is required, and potentially match them with the sort of magnets. So I think this will be an interesting one. I think St Kilda's defence is well set up to match the forward line of Brisbane, though historically it hasn't really been something they've achieved. So I'm interested to see if some of these new pieces that they've added, extra defensive line, extra ruckman, extra midfielder, all that jazz, does kind of give them that lift needed to really compete with the Lions throughout the match.
One question particularly, I think through his first couple of weeks, Woody, and Jack Carroll, who was on Carlton's list, he was taking pick 41 back in 2020. He's playing a new role across half-back. Have you sort of assessed closely how he's been faring down there, and how do you think that sort of has come about?
Yeah, it's come through need. So obviously the move of Nazaya to a midfield and even a forward position has kind of opened up a slot at halfback flank to assist Sinclair. I was surprised it went to Carroll. I thought, prior to the season starting, seeing the preseason matches, all that jazz, I had an inkling it'd probably go Travalia, maybe even a Kai Fincher, somebody that they were, wanting to develop longer term. So it's kind of surprised me to see him move into this position. And I wouldn't say he's excelling. I don't think he's quite the natural halfback flank that Naz is, obviously. But his mistakes that were fairly evident, in preseason matches, round 0, that sort of stuff, they seem to be less frequent. Now, it's a very small sample size, 5 matches, of which, half of them, I'd say he hasn't been getting better. But in the last 2 or so matches, he seemed to get his eye in a little bit. His turnovers aren't great. They seem to, hit the scoreboard more often than we'd like. But a lot of our turnovers seem to do that at the moment as well. So it's hard to see. It's hard to tell if it's really to him to blame there. So, look, I'd be surprised if he kept it all year. We've had a penchant for going these, I'd say, left wing halfback flank options. You could look at a Jared Lynott. You could look at a Riley Bonner, both ex-Port Adelaide players, which is a bit of a surprise now to think about it. But I think there's a possibility he goes down that route where later in the season we are looking at the VFL players that have excelled in that position. But it's his to lose. So at this point, if he keeps slightly improving week on week, he might be able to, extend the gap between him and the player that's fighting for his role and really lock it in.
And it's probably a big part too of Carroll's game. I think a couple of years ago, early doors in 2024, he had an encouraging start to the season, and there was a few times where he was the sub, and unfortunately he lost his place in the Blues team and made it difficult for him to come back. And of course, what happened where he was delisted, it was sort of bewildering as to why that happened. But he's got this second opportunity with St Kilda, and thus far he's taking it both hands, which is always great to see, because especially when you're only early doors in your career and you get delisted right away, it does almost zap out a fair amount of morale that you've instilled within yourself. And what he's doing thus far, I think he can only get better with each game, and with Ross Lyon's structure, with what he does entail to him. We'll move on now to the Saturday afternoon game, which takes place at Optus Stadium, Woody. And this one's got plenty of rain forecast. I think it's approximately 20 to 60 millimetres they are expecting in Perth. And a couple of years ago, when the Tigers travelled to play Fremantle at Optus Stadium, there was a fair amount of rain. It was a Saturday night encounter, which the Dockers won fairly comfortably by 9 goals, but that was pretty much waterlogged and almost grab your flippers out for the entire game. The Tigers were really good in that second term against the Suns, and the forward half pressure was such a big key for them maintaining sort of a close gap with Gold Coast and at times hitting the lead midway through the second quarter. And then just unfortunately Lynch's hamstring injury, Nankervis going down with the same hamstring injury, and the Tigers lost that structure and the Suns eventually overwhelmed them. Your thoughts, particularly with this wet weather footy and the pivotal importance of Orion Mansell, Steely Green, Seth Campbell, Morris Rioli Jr. to try and at least cause some headaches at ground level and be effective?
Yeah, look, I mean, if they're not required to swim, certainly. No, look, this will be, honestly, if this match is played, I have heard some rumours that are going around suggesting it might need to be rescheduled due to the weather. But again, they are rumours, most likely from Big Footy or something, so who knows. But look, if it goes ahead and it's not just going to be an absolute one-sided affair, it's going to be the players you mentioned. Whether it's a Maurice Rioli, he'll need to do a couple of rundown tackles. Jack Ross, whoever it might be, they're going to need to apply the pressure. And to be fair, they've had moments where they've looked capable of doing that against good sides. It, for me, will come down to, can they do it for a long enough period for it to not be a blowout? Because I think at this point, Richmond pretty much at their bottom, right? Like they're going to bounce, certainly, at some point in the next year, two, something like that. But right now, when you've got a side that's gunning for top four and a side that's trying to get out of the bottom four, I'm not expecting big things.
And Fremantle have done a pretty effective job with not having Caleb Sarong's influence, and the same thing occurred last week where Carlton Tolstrup held in the 16 touches, and Justin Longmuir spoke about post-game presser. It was the other things away from in the stoppages, which he did so effectively well, blocking for his teammates or just being that almost extra decoy to help almost free up congestion, allow Shea Bolton to roam away and burst from stoppages. And that's probably the next part of Sarong's game, which he has improved upon. And I think early doors of his career, he was almost thrown a few shutdown roles. So he knows exactly how it feels to be on the receiving end of heavy opposition attention. And he did extremely well. And he's going to get the same. Yeah, I think Jack Ross most likely will go to him for the majority of the game. Maybe not right away, but maybe after the first quarter if Sarong does get off the leash a fair bit. But then we have Andrew Brayshaw there, Shea Bolton, who had one of his best games in a Dockers jumper. And their half forwards were the biggest catalyst for them. Chris Sherry on debut. Murphy Reid had an excellent game. I think just that whole balance with pushing high up forward and then where the ball's going to hit ground level, which is going to happen 100% of the time this Saturday. I just think that's going to be extremely vital for who can almost maintain their composure and balance when the ball does hit ground level and bolt the other way and try and gain as much territorial advantage as possible. So it's definitely a must area for both teams. Do you have any sort of other matchups or other identifying parts within the game of periods that could be decisive, Woody?
I mean, I think this is going to be a very tough match for Richmond. I've mentioned it a couple of times here and there. I think defensively they stack up all right. But the issue is getting it out of there. You've got to hand it to midfielders that can actually do something with it and not, just have midfielders that are leaking inside 50s as well. So I don't think this will be a great match for Richmond. I worry about the talls. I just don't think Bolter's been playing particularly well. I can't see him really holding Tracy to much. And then you've got Pat Voss, who, I don't really see who can hold him, to be honest. So I feel like this is a really big danger game for Richmond. If they are going to have a chance, it could be because of the wet weather. It could be kind of going back to the Mosquito Fleet style that they had under Hardwick many, many moons ago. So, look, I don't imagine that this is going to be a particularly great match for Richmond or their supporters. But we've said many times, football is a very odd sport. And look, perhaps the rain is an assistance to them. Maybe this sort of maybe this sort of lack of ability to move the ball defensively as Fremantle has been known to do in the past before setting up their attack. Maybe that unravels on them because, they just don't have the hands there for it. But we'll have to wait and see,
Well, there was a similar game when Port Adelaide travelled down here at Optus Stadium to play West Coast in 2019. It was a Friday night game and it was slippery conditions underneath, and Port Adelaide pretty much just went, well, we're not going to kick it high and long, but we'll just try and put it out into open space and eliminate Tom Barras, Jeremy McGovern from intercept marking, and the ploy worked. So that could well be a similar tactic that the Tigers can use to implement and try and at least get those important meters going forward and try and retain the ball as much as possible inside their forward 50, because it did work to success for periods of time against the Suns last weekend at the MCG. So there's so many intriguing layers to how this will play out, and whether it is one of the most sort of wettest games yet for the season, well, we'll see, depending on what the weather forecast brings out for the remaining 5 or 6 months of this 2026 AFL season. We'll move on to the Saturday night game, Woody, because this one is also back at Marvel Stadium between Essendon and North Melbourne, where the Bombers have won their last 12 encounters against the Kangaroos, with North Melbourne's last victory over the Bombers coming all the way back in round 8 of 2016 year, where Essendon had 34 players provisionally suspended for that campaign. North Melbourne lost to West Coast by 17 points. I think during the second and third quarters there, they lost their way a fair bit too and kept bombing the ball outside their back 50, trying to relieve the pressure. And for Essendon, it was only probably a couple passages of play there that they looked extremely prominent in. But apart from that, they were just completely shredded to ribbons by Port Adelaide. Your thoughts on this, particularly a transitional aspect for both teams, but for the Bombers especially, if North Melbourne are able to almost chip their way out too easily from the back 50.
I mean, you've nailed a lot of the major points. This is a huge game for both sides. I mean, this could determine a coach right now. And we're at round 3, so yeah, I struggled. I think we'll see a change in historic results, right? In terms of just who wins, I do think North will want to bounce back. I agree with a lot of what you said. I think a lot of their possession last week was fairly nothing. It was just turnovers. And I believe Kane has put some heat on Sheasel. He's done that a few times in his career, but 40-yard disposals for, I think it was 8 score involvements, maybe less. It's not a good return. It makes you wonder, if you should go on with this sort of option. It's essentially the same problem that Tom Mitchell faced in his career. Is he using the ball well enough despite the 40-odd he'll get? And I think it's up to the Kangaroos to pull their finger out, because at this point, if it doesn't work against Essendon, they're in for a world of hurt for the rest of the season. And look, Essendon's likewise. If they don't manage to get this win, the bells they will toll for somebody. But I think at this point it's early, so we're not going to see anybody go because of what happens this match. I think it would take an almighty shellacking from one of the sides to really put a coach's career at threat at this point of the season. But I think this is such a pivotal match for how the psyche develops for each side for the rest of the season, that if it doesn't go right here, you're going to start to question where it can go right going forward. So I think this is, whoever loses this game is probably locked in 18th spot and is probably losing their coach by the end of the year.
Where do you think particularly the structure of Essendon, when you do watch their games, Woody, and this has been a problem for the last 3 seasons, and already it's a small sample size, but 2 games in, they're dead last for points off turnovers, 91 a game. They're dead last for scores from stoppages. I think it's 40.4 points per game. Clearances, they're dead last at 27 per game. A lot gets talked about their midfield not being super big, and they're sort of easy to maneuver around, especially when you do get them sort of, not shove them near the ball, but sort of get a little bit up close and then just slightly use better body positioning to get first clearance and then completely bound away. But also the other parts when they do move the ball, where do you think maybe within the whole structure of what they do, that makes it a little bit pedantic at times and too easy for the opposition to peel back and get numbers behind the ball.
Well, they play too safe, and like I know you need to when you're not a particularly good side, but the way they move the footy isn't threatening enough to make defenses need to worry. In all honesty, and when they start to move the ball forward, like they're not direct enough to goal to again challenge sides. And when they miss a kick, because it is a situation of when, unfortunately, be that, it goes to a ground ball and it's in dispute, or maybe there was a free against, or something that just means that they don't retain the footy. They're all out of position. They're all at sea. They seem to try and flood too far forward to lock in the ball, but they don't actually get deep entries in forward. So what tends to happen is they get to about 50 odd meters or so out, give or take 10 or so, and they'll turn the ball over somewhere there. And they've brought their defensive line too far up the field, and they're just ready to be counter-attacked against. And look, there's a lot of people saying they don't run hard enough defensively. And there's an element of, yeah, that's clearly correct. But there's also an element of, if you're structurally in a position where you can't catch somebody, you're going to question, why do you run, right? Like, and I think that's the problem they have, that structurally, the way that they've set up the play and how they want to move the ball, how they want to defend against opposition, where opposition might be on the ground, I just think it's wrong, in all honesty. And I think what we see is a side that doesn't have firepower is unable to use the minimal firepower that they do have, because they're not effective at helping them get the ball. And they're ready to just be torn to shreds on the opposite end. So I tend to think this is a coaching problem. And I think that the issues we see in the results from statistics come down to not having personnel that will be perfect for what you might be trying to achieve, but then also not recognizing that the personnel aren't achieving it and adjusting your game plan. So for me, this is a big coaching issue. I don't want to lay all the blame here on Scott, but I mean, you can't blame 44 guys, right? Like, at some point, what the 44 guys are being told to do is wrong.
And positioning too, at times where I think a lot of players get sucked into the ball. We see it so often in stoppages in defensive 50 where you're almost guarding grass, and it makes it, and it's almost though who you on, who you actually defending, and that's where a lot of that vision gets pointed out in the Monday morning sessions. It's almost, no, stop the PowerPoint here. This is what should have happened, right? Where, say, player A should have been 5 meters closer to his man instead of being 20 meters away. And it's those things that I think almost tear coaches' hair out, and that's probably the hardest bit to comprehend.
I agree. If what they're being told is just not happening, then yeah, okay, you could turn around and say that there's 44 guys that just aren't listening, right? And that's a potential. But yeah, you got to wonder if it's coaching or not, because if a guy is 20 meters away from where he's meant to be, is that because he's told to be 20 meters from where we all think he's meant to be, or is like something else going? Because for me, it comes down to a coach should be able to, like, I mean, look at Adam Kingsley. A coach should be able to call somebody on their phone, scream at them for a second. The player gets back on the field and goes, right, he told me not to stand here. I don't want to get screamed at again. Like, there's an element of, like, players can adapt really well, right? Like, really, really well. And I don't understand how we can say players can all of a sudden be a bottom 4 side, get a new coach and be top 4, and then say, all right, but we're seeing consistent consistent coaching problem, because it is a coaching problem. You can't be 20 meters away from your guy and have the coach do nothing about it. And if the coach is trying to do something about it and it's not working, it's still kind of a coaching problem. Stop playing the player. So, like, I can't see a way that it doesn't come back to a coaching issue. And yeah, there's players that aren't able to achieve what he wants, sure. But every coach has that. every coach has a guy that turns it over more than you'd like and, would pull your hair out at moments. I vaguely remember Hawthorn's captain used to be that guy for Alistair Clarkson. So, yeah, I don't know. I think for me, it's very obvious that you could get better results out of that crew. And if you can get better results out of that crew, it's a coaching issue.
And changing structures does take time, but I think those basic elements of being on your opposing man close enough, I think, is just second to none, most underlying importance to denying stoppage goals. And that's where I think they talk about the final 5 minutes of every quarter, and particularly stoppage goals are so crucial, right, in the context of the game and how much it does underline it. And those particular parameters are so vital for how games are won or lost. And it comes down to a lot of that. And I think it sort of becomes a coach's harping to make sure that players get the memo on what's going on in the last 5 minutes of each quarter. We'll move on from the Bombers-Kangaroos game, Woody, onto the first of two games on Sunday. So this one at the Adelaide Oval between Port Adelaide and West Coast, where Port have won their last four encounters over West Coast by an average of 50 points. The Eagles' last win over Port Adelaide, the venue, came all the way back in round 21 of 2018, where Jeremy McGovern kicked the match-winning goal after a siren for the West Coast Eagles to win by 4 points. I think after they trailed that game by about 26 points or something throughout. Really good win last week for the Eagles. And what they were able to do in quarters 2 and 3, hold off North Melbourne for the first 10-15 minutes of the final term. And there seemed to be something in place there for the Eagles. Their forward half intercepts were on song during the second term. And as for Port Adelaide, yes, it was Essendon, but it was them playing the footy that I think we all expected Port Adelaide to play anyway and really carry on from what Ken Hinkley did in his 13 seasons at the helm.
Yeah, I mean, look, Josh Carr has got, a bit of time up his sleeve to kind of figure out what he wants to do and that sort of stuff. But he has been given a massive advantage in already being there for a year, doing a proper transition. So I think we're not seeing too much like extreme variation out of Port and sort of the changes in coaching. But it is starting to get a bit different from Mini's Eagles. And I did like what they did in the second half. I think a lot of it comes down to having competent talls ahead of the ball. Missing Waterman for large chunks of last year, not having Job Shanahan or a Cooper Duff Tyler to, play that dual ruck forward role. Even a little bit more from Flynn, just having a game where he winds back the clock a little bit. Looks like the guy that they wanted to get in the first place. Surround that with some kids that have some vigor, a defense that's starting to look like it's coming together with Ruben Jimby looking like at one stage I thought he was a wingman, but he looks like he could be a key defender. So you can see it starting to click for West Coast. And whether that's something that can happen, each and every week, that'll be debatable. We'll know in a month or two or not. But I think we should be in for a good game. I think obviously most people will look at Port's midfield, some of their talls in Aaliyah and surrounding people and whatnot. But I think it'll be a good game that goes to the wire. Mate, do you think I'm off the mark here or what are your thoughts?
I don't think you're off the mark at all, Woody. I just think that extra level of confidence that West Coast took away from the win over North Melbourne, I think can hold them in good stead going forward. And they've got a foundation there that they have been trying to build on for these last 12 months under Andrew McQualter. And that does take a bit of adjusting to. It's not all one game right away and we've suddenly the game plan's in place. It takes, for example, 22, 23 games to get it absolutely spot on. And the little magnets that are starting to take effect are starting to show. And we saw last season, right, when Job Shanahan came into the team. I think the game against Collingwood at Marvel Stadium where he took a number of really good marks and kicked a goal. And there was something promising about him in that contest. And you also have down back now Tyler Young's had a solid start to his new chapter at the West Coast Eagles. Unfortunately, Harry Edwards is out due to yet another concussion, but he was also pretty solid in their last encounter. And you mentioned Ruben Jimby and what he's done the last 18 months in transitioning from a midfield role into a backline role and taking it with both hands. And even though, yes, he is undersized, but he plays a lot taller than his actual height. So I think there are magnets already in place for West Coast to leap forward and take those next adjustments. The big step too for them when it comes to playing Port Adelaide is how well they thrive in stoppages. Port Adelaide with Butters' first step out of the middle, Horn Francis to go put in there and also rest up forward. And that's where I think Brady Hoff is going to have that important role, because Hoff does those number of shutdown roles where he plays on opposition's best damaging forwards, or in terms of medium forwards out are midfielders resting up forward. So they're going to be in it. Just the question though is around the stoppage area for West Coast, whether they can sustain it. And also with Port Adelaide's 3 tall forwards there, Jack Whitlock, who's come along since coming into the team late last season, Jack Lukosius, who had a couple of injuries last season, couldn't get out in the park. Also have Mitch Georgiades, who just completely towed up Zach Reid last week after Reid got the better of him in the team's corresponding game last season. It's a big task for West Coast tall defenders, and also the backline, trying to make Alia and Asava Radigalia accountable, because Port Adelaide's tall defenders can be susceptible if you do cause enough pressure on them. But I just feel as though I think Port Adelaide should have enough petrol tickets to get over the line in this one.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think while West Coast has shown a lot more than they did at this point 12 months ago, I think it's one of those ones. It's just hard to get the dice rolling in your favour consistently, and they're not in a position where they're not kind of rolling the dice. So, I'd like to see them get another win, but I think Port gets it done.
We'll move on now to the final game, which takes place at the MCG between Carlton and Melbourne, where 5 of the last 6 games between the teams have been decided by less than 10 points, and Carlton have won the last 4 encounters over Melbourne. The Blues coming off the bye last week. Melbourne lost by 8 goals to Fremantle, where a number of basic skill errors and sort of sloppy handling of the football and kicking the ball in their back half under pressure cost them, particularly in that first quarter alone. And Stephen King, their coach, addressed that in his post-game press conference. Just a couple of areas, Woody, first and foremost. And for Melbourne, just their run, the outside run, I think is going to be a big danger in this one. And then for the Blues, when the game does get a little bit scrappy, when it does start to tighten down a bit and the game's not in their terms, the same thing happened against Richmond the second half of their game in round 1. How do you see that panning out?
It's hard to, I think Melbourne could be better than I gave them credit for walking into the season. I just thought the off-season changes they had weren't particularly going to help. That being said, Carlton hasn't looked amazing either, and I'm struggling to pick how I think this goes. I think this comes down to Carlton should be a better side, in my opinion. But if they get to the same position they've been in the last 2 matches, where they're up at half-time, I can see the thoughts creeping in and it all kind of starting again, where the Ds, they're not bad enough to stay behind a whole match. So if Carlton jump them, I can just see the same script rolling out for a third time. And, whether Carlton can weather the storm or not, I mean, it's not Richmond and it's not Lynch missing 7 shots in a row. So I'm starting to think if Melbourne can, not turn it over as much and maybe not allow the slingshot that happened against St Kilda or the easy entries from Fremantle. If they can tighten that a little bit, I think this is their game to win.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very close, Woody. And the kicking woes of Carlton these last couple of seasons have been absolutely highlighted in bold. Last season, they were 17th for kicking efficiency. This season already last at 61.4%. Just, it doesn't get the job done. And I think a lot of that, if they can get past their half back line and at least have that amount of risk, which they did in that first half against Richmond, then I think it can open up for the Blues. As long as they maintain that level of some abundance to keep the ball going and not get stagnant when it does get a little bit sticky in those passages of play. And I think probably the other part too is with the ruck duel with Gordon and Mark Pitnet there, and we've seen Pitnet's first couple of games where he has been a lot more aggressive with his ruck work and trying to outbody opposing ruckman Toby Nankervis, Brodie Grundy, and almost showing that full mantle of force when Carlton do have a stoppage inside their deep forward 50 and prizing a few balls out and kicking it through the middle of the stick. So that duel is going to be extremely fascinating for how it does play out, because Gordon can pretty much just maneuver all day and not get fatigued. And that happened against St Kilda, where he pretty much played the entirety of the second half without having a rest on the bench. So it's going to work both ways with this, and trying to exploit one another's weaknesses or in terms of fatigue levels when that does transpire. And the other part I see too is with Melbourne's zippiness at ground level, with both Pickett's there with Latrell and Cozzy Pickett, and of course Cozzy will have his run on ball from time to time. There are danger signs in this too if Melbourne can go full bolt without much pressure. And something has sort of caught my eye these last couple of seasons. When teams do get on the outside against Carlton, there seems to be a gap between speed levels. And it's not a criticism, but it's almost just pointing out the truth for what the actual difference is. Is that something you've probably noticed maybe, Woody?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many different ways to equate speed, right? Like if you're thinking of ball movement, then Carlton can be as fast as everybody else. But if you're talking defensive running, then yeah, they're slow. And it comes down to, and it's the same problem they have from their midfield, right? Like they can't break away from the midfield because they will get chased down. So they need to use hands or they need to use feet. If they use hands, you can't get it as far, so you're not really escaping tons of pressure. You need to be able to weave through traffic, change angles, that sort of thing. And if you're using your feet, you are trying to spot somebody up at least 15 plus meters down the line. And to be honest, as you mentioned, they're kicking shocking. Their disposal in general is pretty shocking. But it's a recipe for trouble because they can get the footy, but what they do with it is almost always going to be a problem. If they can't execute their skills, they can't break away from traffic, and they can't really create chains to get it from wherever they are in their field to actually in the forward line and give their forwards an opportunity, yeah, they're cooked. And that's the problem that they've seen in the last couple of weeks. It's that their chains just break down. There is enough pressure applied by their opposition that they stop at kick 2 or kick 3 and they don't get it past, halfway down the ground. So yeah, I think this is a massive danger game. If the ball hits the deck, it's all ready for Melbourne to pounce upon it. And I mean, look, yeah, one-on-one contested ball, Carlton can win that. But the second you start needing to do something with it, it's Melbourne's footy.
And that's the biggest question of the lot come the encounter and what does transpire in that particular aspect. Just a couple of injury fronts too for Melbourne. Daniel Turner hurt his hand in the game against Fremantle, at least out for 2 to 3 weeks. And for Carlton, a couple of potential inclusions with Adam Sarr from his hamstring injury and Nick Newman, who served his suspension playing in the VFL. Well, that is all we have time for the round 3 look ahead and some of the AFL news that have been making the headlines. Woody, where can everyone catch all your work and also on your socials?
Well, you can see me here each and every week, but otherwise you can see me at Wooden Spoon Data. I've got the handle on most things. Mostly come out on YouTube with videos. Been pretty obsessed with Supercoach this year, so there's a fair few of those videos. Otherwise, I've got a few things up my sleeve, so keep an eye out.
Definitely give Woody a follow, and his video content's magnificent. If you're a St Kilda supporter and you want all the breakdowns from how they won the game or lost the game, access Wooden Spoon Data on YouTube and also on Saints TV with Jake, where Woody's also part of the trio as they break down the game in full detail. I think for roughly, about 50 minutes to an hour?
Yeah, we generally about an hour, give or take. This year it's been a little bit shorter. I feel like their vibes have been a bit more negative than we'd liked, so we tend to wrap it a little bit early. But no, we have a lot of fun there.
So they definitely listen to Woody and also catch up on all his work thus far. He does brilliant work on his YouTube channel and much more. Thank you again for your listenership for another episode. To tune into this episode, you can catch it through Spotify and leave us a 5-star review and a review of the podcast. And you can also catch the page Out on the Full through Instagram. We'll see you back here next week as we look ahead to round 4 and some of the most important footy news that have been making the headlines.